Let's go ahead and get started. We're a little bit late, 2:04. We're good down there? Good. Okay. Public workshop. This workshop session purpose, one item, discussion regarding the number and locations of properties that are included in the application for the FEMA buyout elevation program. This will include a presentation. Joel, would you like to start us off here?
Judge Commissioners, what we're going to, or what they're going to cover, basically is the buyout and elevation program. We're seeing the people that applied, the number, how many people for each one of those, as well as the infrastructure program, and go over that. Shouldn't take real long. We'll let y'all get out of here, and I apologize for having to call this Tuesday on a short notice without knowing Wednesday. However, I won't be available tomorrow. We need to get the application in and push forward actually by tomorrow, so about this afternoon. And also, this again does not commit the county to any of this at this point. The decision that's going to commit us will be when we FEMA approves the application, when we get to that point, if they approve it, and then we'll have to make that decision, that commitment decision, yes, we agree. So that being said, I will turn it over to Phil, and he'll begin with the slide.
Good afternoon again. Good to see everybody. Thank you again for having us. So we'll start with page 2, slide 1. So we ended up with 2 applications that we have brought for Judge Crooks to sign if we want to keep moving forward. The buyout application. And then after we go through these first 2 slides, I'll point you to some handouts in the back of the packet. We ended up with 19 homes in the buyout application. The total cost was roughly just shy of $3.5 million. Federal share of 75% that we discussed was $2.5 million, and the local share is $863,000 and some change. We ended up with a 1.52 benefit cost ratio for those. And then if you go to the next slide, we ended up with a much better look for elevation application. We weren't anticipating but maybe a handful, but we ended up with 23 homes. I said in our last workshop we were going to have to get creative to see if we could make this work. Essentially what I did is Jeff Ward and Associates and I managed a lion's share of the elevation programs in the state of Texas, so we know all the elevation contractors really well. We got one out of the Beaumont area that we were very comfortable with, sent him all of the addresses that said they would do either buyout or elevation, and they said elevation. And he sent us back a cost, a really good worksheet that had all the square footages, the stories, the type of slabs they were, whether they had attached garage, detached garages, what kind of porches they had. He got very detailed and gave us a cost to elevate to 4 feet. Some will be less, some will be more. But we figured if we could get the 4-foot cost, we could see if we could make this work. We ended up with 23 homes in this application. Total cost just shy of $4 million. The federal share is just shy of $3 million, 2.95, and then the local share was $983,700. We ended up with a benefit cost ratio of 1.02. If you go towards the back of your, I think it's the second to last and the third to last page, those are your 2 lists of the addresses with the total cost per home, the federal share, local share, and then the benefit cost ratio for each individual home, and it shows you the totals at the bottom that are in those slides. So the obvious next steps are to sign all the documents. Everything that we can sign without Judge Cook's signature, we've already signed and have ready to go. We've got a plethora of other forms.
I got a brand new pen.
Perfect. Is that a tool?
It is.
That's the only pen I use. And and then get those submitted. There has been rumors and arbitrary changes of a new due date at TDEM tomorrow. So we're going to try to get those signed today. We'll get them all uploaded to e-files tonight. The website still says November 25th, but I personally called, or Jeff has personally called Dave Jackson. Dave Jackson said he's not reviewing anything that's not on his desk by Thursday. Now, good luck with that for him, but we'll see. So I figured we should just get it in, so we'll get everything signed. The application's ready to go. We'll package it and send it off to FPP tonight. And then we wait. I would assume they would start making announcements in the next 4 to 6 months on what applications are being awarded or denied. And then after that, we'll start looking. Well, actually, let's go to the next slide, and then we'll go flip back to the CDBG slide. And then once approved, what we'll do is we'll do some outreach to the homeowners, let them know that the applications have been approved. Then they'll start getting nervous, and we'll start probably having a few drop out here and there, and then we'll have some excitement going. Then we can start procuring contractors for the county. The elevation contractors, the appraisers, demolition contractors, any other contractors we need. And we can get all of that done while we're waiting for funding. And then once the money gets sent from FEMA to TDEM and then TDEM and wired to the county, we can start. And we'll get started probably the next day. We could go through the detailed SOPs of each program if you really want to. I don't think we need to, but we would start. We probably have an order of where we wanted to go, and we would start getting bondings, insurance for elevation for the contractor, and get the contractor started on the elevation programs. And then buyouts, we'd start appraising homes and getting the buyout process started. And then as far as CDBG-PR, what we'll start doing soon is we're going to have to survey these 2 lists of homeowners to see who, if any, qualifies under the LMI rules for HUD. And then if we have a universe of those folks, then we can look at and see if we can put together any kind of a CDBG-DR application for the match. There's still some questions. As you know, Joel and I both attended a workshop a few weeks ago on these programs. There's still a lot of questions. There's still a lot of confusion coming out of that room. But we would still, no matter what, go into this as deeply as we can to see if we can get some kind of a match package for at least a portion of these homeowners on both of these programs. Then we would, another thing we're going to have to start doing is drafting a set of standard operating procedures that HUD requires. We would start drafting those for the county. That includes your Section 3, your affirmative fair housing policies, your Davis-Bacon policies, and we would create an SOP that you're going to be required to have anyway for any of the CDBG programs. And we would start that process, and then if we have a universe of eligible applicants, we'll start drafting an application and do this again to start processing any CDBG match applications. And so if there's any questions, we can go from there, and then when we're done with this, Nancy's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the infrastructure for applications as well.
Well, that leads to the very first question, which is today we're just discussing the homes. Correct. We're not making any final decisions on or setting up any final decisions on the infrastructure portion. We're just getting a briefing on that.
Well, we're hoping to give you the applications for those 2. They're ready. We feel called about this deadline. We just went ahead and finished them up. So.
Okay. Well, then when you get up here, there's a couple questions about the local shares I would
Yes.
like to ask you about. In the meantime, I know we spoke on the buyouts. One of the things we were trying to avoid was, what's the phrase you use, a checkerboard pattern? We don't want to have that. I know there were some locations here that there were issues. Did we get all those straightened out?
Probably not.
Okay.
But I want to remind everybody, this is voluntary on both ends. Even if we get funded, or when we get funded, the county's not obligated to buy anybody out, and the homeowners are not obligated to buy out. So if you chose, we don't want to do that house because of this issue, or these two houses, we don't have to, or you don't have to.
And I thought and it looks like y'all did make some phone calls with regards to some of the ones that the benefit cost ratio on the elevation was kind of iffy, and we discussed with them about maybe buyout or vice versa. Did all that go fairly smooth? Or
Yeah, everybody.
More of a local.
Yeah, I don't want to say I called everybody on these two lists, but I spoke to a good portion
you
of
called?
these lists.
Oh, okay.
And they're just excited to know something was going on.
Good.
That you're actually moving forward. Most everybody on the buyout list, that's what they want. They don't want anything else other than buyouts. The elevation list, it was people that were on the fence, or I just really love my house, I never want to leave it. Let's try to elevate it. So, but I think everybody I spoke to was happy with what list they were on, and I had to call a good portion of the list anyway because we were missing some documents. So most everybody I spoke to was excited about either one they were on. So.
But even so, we ended up with more people on the elevation list
Yes.
than on the buyout list, which to me is kind of a success. They get to stay in Orange County, they get to stay in their homes if it all works out.
Yes.
And I think that was a plus. And given the problems with the ratio, they get all the credit. They sat there and crunched these numbers every which way they could to try to make that happen. I think originally we were looking at possibly not having hardly anyone eligible for elevation. And we ended up with 23.
Yes, sir.
And would we end up on buyouts?
19.
So
That's a much better number.
it's way better number.
The question I had was 105 East Kentucky and 112 East Florida. Are they not in the city of Orange?
I didn't check that personally, but the people that were doing these check, we found several that were on the final list that we took out, but I don't believe so. If we didn't catch it, I don't believe so.
Kevin, that's the code. That is in the city of Orange, correct?
Yeah, Kentucky and Florida Street.
Is it?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay.
And I think that's the only ones that I
Okay.
was pretty sure were in the city.
Is that going to require some recalculation for your total of 1.02?
We can leave them on there and just back them out later.
Okay.
At this point, I don't think we can alter the application and do it in any time.
Would that drop you below 1?
They're on an elevation.
Yes.
Dropping 2, probably not. It'll be a balancing act with that one since it's so close, but it wasn't anything neither Jeff nor I were concerned about.
The good thing is their BCR is not real high to start off with, so I don't think it's going to probably in the whole drop you below that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
If they were about 1.5 by themselves, I'd be a little concerned.
Exactly. Nobody on the elevation's too high, so but no, I wouldn't be overly concerned with that.
I was just looking at addresses right now.
You know what you got to do. Come on, George.
I
You got to say who you are and the whole band.
My name is George Garza. I'm 117988 Gladys in Beaumont. I'm curious of the 20, excuse me. Of the 19 homes included for buyouts applications, is that all? Weren't there any others that were interested? Did you have a lot of interested people that decided, no, I don't want to do that after all? I'm thinking that's a very few number. Consider how many people were flooded out.
From the public meeting we had, I don't remember the exact numbers. We brought that spreadsheet from the last workshop that had the color codings based on what we thought they would be eligible for, not that this one right there. We had roughly around 100 responses from the public meeting, and I want to say we only had roughly 47 or so that we thought would be eligible for either program. And then we had a chunk that were not eligible. For this program, that doesn't mean they aren't eligible for CDBG or other FEMA programs, but not for these two programs. Because these two programs are based on lost history.
And George, the 19 is just for the buyouts. There's also 23, so it's 42 total.
So we dropped. Yeah.
And some
Doesn't
probably
happen.
they weren't eligible because they didn't have the necessary documentation, repetitive losses. I know that's more CDBG than FEMA.
Well, no, these two particular programs, you had to have multiple losses, multiple claims.
There you go.
And that's the key word, claims. You can be flooded 8 times, or the history of your property could have been flooded 8 times, but if the previous owners didn't make FEMA claims, FEMA doesn't register it as a claim. So, and we had several properties that were like that, and you also had to be in a special flood hazard area for these two programs. We had a lot of homes in a special flood hazard area.
This is only unincorporated.
Yes, sir.
And see, Joy, this is not any of the cities, it's unincorporated.
I understand. My last question is, of the buyouts, it says 25% local charity, so it's an individual cost for property. Is that responsibility of the homeowner to pay for that share?
Yes, all the homeowners signed a notice of voluntary interest that clearly stated that they were going to commit to the 25% funds. But we are, if you remember the last workshop, we are going to see who's eligible to maybe possibly get that matched from a CDBG program. Maybe we're going to see.
We got to follow those issues.
Yes, sir. We still have a lot of questions about that program.
Does that hold true for the elevation program as well?
Yes, sir.
It's responsibility of the homeowner?
Yes, sir. If that's it, I'll turn it over to the
Good afternoon. So when Phil called last week with this bit of information that he heard about Dave Jackson and the 15th, we did a little calling around, talked to some people. I actually went on the TDM website to see exactly how many applications have started to be submitted for infrastructure. Either TDM is not updating their website or they're not getting any applications because it still says 25. They have $3 billion to spend. The 25 applications submitted so far is less than $1 billion. So, it's a little confusing of what's going on with TDM right now.
Yeah, and wasn't that the same 25 that was there like 3 weeks ago?
Yes, sir. Actually, probably more like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, last time I looked was 3 weeks, and that's what it was.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyways, the hazard mitigation program's deadline's normally set about a year after the disaster. So we were always working towards having our infrastructure and the other projects ready to be submitted to TDM by November 25th. That just so happens to be a holiday period. So we were close anyway. So when he called, I said, it's probably 99% there. Let's go ahead and just get these things to the finish line. So we're working over the weekend pretty hard to get these things finished up. We're putting together the package now to get some documents to the judge that he has to sign. Where we ended up with the infrastructure. From the infrastructure committee and several discussions, we were really focusing on those high priority type projects. So basically, there is 6 applications that are being prepared. And I'll go through those and then I'll talk a little bit about the process with infrastructure. It's a little different. So you can see the first one that everybody was very much interested in, it was very, very high priority, was to address improving neighborhood drainage. This is local drainage in specific neighborhoods. There's 21 neighborhoods. We combined the neighborhoods because quite frankly, and we went through the details, had we not, there would have been an awful lot of neighborhoods that would have never made the BCA. So we got a lot of benefits from some neighborhoods that unfortunately had some significant damage. The total cost for the neighborhood improvement program is about $29 million. The federal cost share is almost 22. It's 21,857,968. And then the local share would be a little over $7 million. By putting all of the neighborhoods in that was initially identified, we were still able to come up with a BCA of 1.02. And that was a balancing act for a while there. We started playing with, but do we take this in, do we take this out? And finally, we came through with enough damages, unfortunately, that we could get it up there. The second one that was a very, very high priority was replacing tank car culverts with box culverts. This will be much more efficient, and quite frankly, a lot of the tank car culverts are deteriorating and not carrying the capacity, and there's some of the potential problems with them on down the road. We started out with tank cars of about 25 tank car locations, and this kept growing. And Clark actually sent out a lot of his guys to really look at the infrastructure again and make sure every one of them was accounted for, and we ended up with 43. Cost for this program is about almost $20 million. It's $19,702,632, with the federal cost share being $13,776,974, which leaves a little under $5 million. Because they're tank cars, because they account for drainage in a larger area, we were able to expand the area of impact, and that's why we could come up with a BCA of 1.23. So we're pretty comfortable. We've got a lot of wiggle room with that. Even if FEMA decides to throw out some of the boundary areas, I think it will still be pretty good with these tank cars.
On both of those issues, we, if I understood correctly, we did coordinate as far as the technical engineering part of it with the drainage district.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I was also under the impression, I hope I'm right, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the neighborhoods themselves in these areas can be unincorporated areas, but they can affect incorporated areas, and we can count that as a benefit towards if we have to meet an LMI or something like that. As a matter of fact, if I understood the lady from FEMA correctly, she even said that it doesn't even have to be in our county. If somebody else is using it, and we can show that they're using these routes that you can't get out of to evacuate or whatever it is, then you can use that as part of your...
Drainage is a little different because you can take in the whole area. You can take into account people having to travel, especially the larger collector roads to get, let's say, from their home to work. That actually also goes into the BCA for delay times if they have to be rerouted. So once we started putting all that data in, yes, drainage, you can really take a large swath at the areas that it would be impacted on.
And we don't have as many hurdles in our way with the local share requesting, say, CDBG assistance as you do, say, with homes? I know there's always
Well,
hurdles,
I mean, you're
but
just
there's
replacing
less.
a homeowner with the county.
Right.
But no, it's not. I mean, you know, y'all will make the decision. Like I said, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the process with infrastructure. It's quite a bit different. This is, if you will, at least, this is still more of a concept cost than it is a defined cost. There's a lot of information still that needs to be gathered. All of these infrastructure projects, except two of them, are what's called a phase project, which means FEMA will, if it is a viable project, BCA of over 1, all of these projects are what the state, TDM, considers a high priority. They're putting a high priority on drainage and fixing some of the drainage issues. They will fund phase 1. Phase 1 consists of doing an H&H study, doing surveying, and getting that additional detailed information you need to really put together a better scope of work. It's a ballpark scope of work. The cost, we had to make some pretty good assumptions because people FEMA did not want a ballpark cost estimate, but it's still 60,000 foot level. Once phase one is done, we will go through this whole process again by then taking that defined scope of work, putting together a new cost estimate that's very, very detailed. It's based on, realistic, very defined numbers. We will run the BCA again, and the BCA still has to meet the one. Before then, FEMA will fund the full project. So with the infrastructure, you're essentially putting together an application that does three things. What's your scope? What's a good, realistic cost estimate? And can you do the project in 36 months? From the time FEMA gives you the money until you have to close it out. So they will give you an extension of another 18 months if you're making progress, but they want to emphasize you have to be making progress to get that extension. So this is a phased project. So even when we're talking these numbers, understand the first thing the county is only going to be responsible for once these projects are approved is that phase one cost.
The H&H.
The H&H,
Can-
and survey.
Can you speak a little bit more to that H&H side? Because that's going to be like a substantially moving target. If you're going to start doing replacements on tank car replacements, to box culverts, to different areas like that, every one of those things has an impact.
Yeah, you're right. So when we're going to start doing some of these H&H studies, that's why we also grouped it that way. An engineer who is responsible for the H&H will look at the whole of all of the tank cars and can take into account that says, all right, putting this one is it's going to have this reduction in the water surface elevation.
So you're going to do it in entirety?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Same with the neighborhoods, although the neighborhoods don't quite have the same thing. But, I mean, there is going to be a reduction, and not only there's a reduction, once we start making these improvements, the water's also going to go downstream faster.
That's my concern, because
Yes.
if we do approve culverts box upstream,
Yes.
downstream, that could be a
And all of
massive
that's going to
problem.
have to be taken into account, because when you're doing drainage, one of the major things is whatever improvement you're doing is you are not causing catastrophic problems downstream.
Yeah, and you've been
So
working.
that will be looked at when we do this H&H analysis.
Yeah, and you have been working with the drainage district in all these regards too,
Yes.
on that effect. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're working from bottom up. Don and I discussed that as well. So you get your outfalls first and work your way back, and that way you don't have those problems. What I wanted to make sure that, especially folks from the media, understand is that whatever happens here today, we're not going to be hit with a $14 million bill out of the blue, because that's what it adds up to. But these numbers are, like you say, they're not dead on at this point.
Exactly.
And this is a process that's going to take some time. I'd also like to point out the cities will have these same opportunities available to them through FEMA to go through this same Matter of fact, they probably already are. So this is going to be happening in multiple locations in the county all at the same
Exactly.
time.
And that's why that communication with everybody is so important. What are they doing? What are we doing? How does it mirror up to help each other? So continuing on, one of the projects that we did put in here was installing generators at the road and bridge precinct yards. This is one that obviously is not a phased project. If FEMA approves it, this would get started, and if I remember correctly, the total time period is somewhere around 20 months or something like that. This can go really quickly. It's not a complicated project. But you can also see, because precinct yards, we were able to take a precinct and basically the number of people that potentially could come to that precinct that would benefit from either getting sandbags or if they were able to get out of the road and stay. So that's why you see that VCR pretty high up there. Another one that was on the list was elevating evacuation routes. Working with Road and Bridge, they identified these areas. You can see on there it's Sharon Lane, South Lakeview, Conley, and Bailey. I will tell you, this does not elevate the whole road. That cost would have been prohibitive. So working with Clark, we had quite a few meetings with him. Basically what we're doing with this, to try and keep the cost reasonable, is the low spots, we're going to elevate it and help stabilize them. And that way, at least, it may not keep the road from flooding eventually, but maybe it will allow people to be able to get in and out for a little longer period of time during a heavy rain event. Retrofitting critical county facilities. This is essentially trying to stop wind-driven rain from going into certain facilities and helping to minimize some of the damage. Remember, the 404, you do not have to have sustained damages. You don't necessarily have to show that water came in through a window and they're able to be able to put something on it. Wait and see how FEMA reacts to this one. But it was and has always been on Orange County's mitigation action plan, and that's where this project comes from.
Nancy, let's hold on just a second before we get too far down the road. On this, going back to elevating routes, I see Kelvin's here, and one of the issues I have is that on West Bluff Road, which is currently a city road looking to become a county road down the line, that's one that I think that needs to be elevated, but I don't know if the city has issued a plan to try to elevate that road before it hands it off to us or what.
The only thing I know, Commissioner, is that we have the grant funds to restore the road, back to standards and everything.
Yeah.
I don't know of any talk to actually elevate it today.
Are y'all going to apply to elevate that road?
I don't recall right offhand, but it doesn't come to mind.
Okay.
That's not the single one.
Because that's one I really kind of think, because it could be a big emergency evacuation route for especially those folks along the river, but it's not our road yet. it's gonna at some point I think it's supposed to change hands if y'all get it back put back together. But I know that's been in front of court a couple times, so
I'll
not
find out next week.
okay. All right. That's just something I wanted to mention when I was thinking about that, because that is a road that I think and there's some talk about maybe even actually having a boat ramp there to make it an emergency evacuation for accidents on the water or whatever. So I guess it's just going to fall through the cracks because it's kind of out there in limbo right now.
Let's just say it's still in limbo, because depending on when the county takes it over and if there's still some hazard mitigation funds available, then potentially y'all could put in another application. When I was talking to a couple of people from TDM and even Aaron Sines from FEMA, and we were talking about the timing of all of this, and he said putting in a good application is more important than putting it in fast. And he did say, he goes, we're still trying to get people to put in applications from IKE. They haven't spent all the hazard mitigation money from IKE yet. So you kind of see, and then there's always been that rumor out there that maybe there's a round 2 of hazard mitigation funds that should come in. So it's not necessarily, back part of it.
But also, too, remember, this is not a complete elevation, though, because
Yeah.
the roads,
Oh, yeah.
most of the roads that are listed here are mine anyway. They're all precinct 4. But they're not talking about elevating the entire road. What they're talking about is that you go, say you go to Sharon or whatever, and you're going to be driving through 1.5 foot of water anyway. They're going to try to get those spots. There's spots along there that are maybe 50, 60, 70 foot long that actually drops down to get you to about 2 foot, 2.5 foot of water. They're going to bring those up so you're only driving through 1.5 foot
Well, see,
of
that's
water.
West Bluff's the same way. You got Pete's Hill back in the back part that doesn't even go into water most of the time.
Yeah.
But you got to get there, and that's what we're talking about, raising up sections where you can at least get back there.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt her, but I was hoping he was hanging around. Long story short is, they have funds, though, that they've already received, or at least approval for funds, and that's going to have to be taken care of first before this can be done.
Yeah, that's right.
restore
That's
it,
right.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
It'd be good if you do them at the same time.
Yeah, and that's he's right, because
Yeah.
if they're tearing it up to fix it, that would be the best
You could
time
build a
to
base a
do
little
it.
higher at that point and raise the road, make it a
Don't
little
fix
bit
the road,
easier.
then we go tear it up to raise it
It
up.
might be better if they kept it and put it with their plan and kept the road than
Yeah.
Or give
maybe
it back to us and give us the money they were gonna spend.
if FEMA will do that.
So this was,
This is the second FEMA
Yeah.
filing
Yeah.
award, which I guess goes back to the point that it probably needs to be elevated just a little bit, or something needs to be done with the elevation, with the drainage across.
Another meeting, Mr. Wolf at the City of Orange has informed the court that they've received $100,000 for that section of road, and they had to do something with that money before that transfer goes back.
If I recall, what they were going to do was spend the FEMA money and give us the $100,000 from the pipeline.
Yeah, that was the $100,000
Once they gave us the road
pipeline,
back,
yes.
when we take that money and spend on the road as well. So it's a pretty complicated situation, and It'd just be nice that if it fell in place that we could actually address that road while we're doing all this, you know.
It didn't appear that the city was going to elevate the road or to shift it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
The dominoes aren't falling in the right order.
No. Okay, I just a point I want to bring up.
There is another road. It was initially in the Elevate. We purposely pulled it out because there was multiple things that need to happen to this road, and that is 4 Oaks Ranch. So that's why you see it is not only a stabilization where the river keeps trying to approach. All we're trying to do is delay that a little further because we're going to end up losing that battle.
It don't keep trying, it
I
keeps
know.
doing it.
And then also elevating in certain spots. We had to keep on massaging this one to try and get the DCA up to a reasonable amount. And based on something that would be a reasonable expectation that it will help 4 Oaks Ranch. So there are some areas where it will strictly get stabilized. There's other areas where it will be raised. There's some areas where we're doing both. This is one that's going to really be interesting once we do the H&H and see exactly what needs to be done in some areas.
It affects a lot of people when you count in 11 acres.
Yes.
Because 11 acres, its entirety should be counted in the
Yes.
DCA side. Yeah, there's a lot of people live back there.
So what I did at the very end, I took the 2 elevation buyout.
Don't go to the very end yet, I'm sorry. On the infrastructure applications retrofit critical county facilities, can you tell me a little bit more about what exactly it is we're looking to do? Is it a proactive approach, putting things in place to prevent some of the damages that we've seen from the past? Or are we...
So it's basically 2 treatments, if you would. One is to windows. It's to put a mylar type material on it to keep, if something is driven into the window from wind, hurricane forces or something like that, it will keep the window from shattering and causing damage. The other one is it's also going to work on sealing the windows much better. The trick with this one's going to be the courthouse and the DA's office. Because we'll probably is what caused a lot of damage, let's say at the DA's office. A lot of these buildings got not flood damage, but more wind-driven rain, and that's what we're trying to stop with some of these. Sheriff's office is on there, the admin building is on there, the DA's office is on there.
That's the external one.
Yes.
Hatches.
Sir?
Need hatches.
And again, there may be some other treatments that will be looked at. These are the ones that we came up with pretty quick just to try and do a cost estimate on and get something in the pipeline for this team to review.
I appreciate it. I was just trying to figure out exactly where we were headed on that.
Yes. So adding up the buyouts, the elevations, and then these 6 infrastructure, totaling all the applications. And again, don't take this as being a hard number. It is what has been identified at this time as potentially about $63 million, of which Orange County would eventually have to identify about $15.7 million. Again, there's some ways that we can reduce that cost share. In-kind services is in there. We actually get to take credit for some of the activities that went on during the storm, especially with volunteer efforts and stuff like that, that goes against, can help against your cost share. Like everything else, there's still some potential funding from the state that could be in play later on down the road. This is a moving target still. Very similar to what Phil said, probably 6 months or so. And then it'll really be interesting to see where TDUM is putting their priorities for these hazard mitigation projects. But again, most of the infrastructure ones will strictly only, a very small portion of that amount's going to be obligated because it's only going to be the phase 1, and the phase 1 is a relatively low number.
Well, this also includes the homes, the elevation and buyout, which...
The residents,
Right.
yes.
So
exactly.
that 25% local share we take out of that, which is about 1.7 million.
Probably. I just kind of wanted to give you you know, if you were to ask us like, what's kind of what our universe looks like, kind of, it's somewhere around that number.
Well, that-
I would
that-
expect that number to be much lower.
Get that 15.7 local, our cost. What's the exchange on our labor and our equipment costs for road and bridge back towards our in-kind
So
contributions?
it will be equal to what their cost is to perform their services.
Dollar for dollar.
Okay, so it's, yeah, as long as we maintain accurate documentation,
Yes.
we're good.
Yes, and we're working with everybody for good documentation, to include during the next storm, better documentation of rescue efforts, when people come in and help with rescues, Cajun Navy, things like that.
Did we ever get those numbers?
We got some, you know what, we Sheriff's Office, and we got some really good numbers there towards the end. I don't think, and I'll say, I know he's here, I don't think they quite knew what they had. And so we said, just give us your records and let us go through it. It was some pretty, a lot of documentation with infrastructure. I actually had to call Tatum and say, you're going to have to help me out because there's no way we're emailing any of these documents. Some of these applications are about 300 to 500 megabytes worth of data. The application is not that hard. You have to support and give backup to every single item in that application. So we're having to do drawings, we're having to do, when we're taking credit for the benefit cost, how did we come out with that? Names, sign-in sheets, all of that's part of this application is backup documentation.
Anything else?
Okay,
Thank you, Nancy.
thank you.
Thanks.
Does anyone else? Joel, anybody have anything they want to add, or any questions from the court, citizens? Anyone? Okay. As they mentioned earlier, there's a lot of documentation that I believe you brought with you today. Is there any major objection from the court about me going ahead and moving forward? If so, we can put it on an agenda, but I would recommend we don't test their deadline. There's no major objection.
And we've already voted to allow it to happen, so.
Just figure since we're all here. Okay. Is there
That's not
anything
my
else?
part.
Oh,
What was that date that you were saying that, we started there?
So
oh,
the unofficial information is November 15th.
Right.
The official Tatum website still says November 25th.
that falls right into the, yeah. Okay. Is there anything else? If not, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 2:48.